All right, continuing the Homelands Remastered set review for limited environments. I'm focusing on draft more so than sealed. Sealed might have a more uh, normal play experience. There may have been at least some consideration when the set was released of how it would play in a sealed format. I don't think there was any consideration of draft though when the set was first designed. But Wizards said there's going to be sealed and draft both. And aside from Temerian Fiends, I think every card's going to be in for the limited environment. So let's start with Anhava Constable. It's a rare. It's 1 green. It's human. He has 2 power, 1+ asterisk, toughness. His toughness is equal to 1 plus the number of green creatures on the battlefield. He does count himself. So he's at least a 2/2 when you play him. And yeah, it's pretty reasonable to expect that he's going to be, a 2/3, a 2/4, a 2/5 over the course of the game, as long as you've got a lot of green creatures. That makes him a good blocker. He's not the best attacker. There are not many good attackers that can really punch through in this format. But on Hava Constable, he's not the worst. And his toughness is going to scale up to the level that he's well out of range of the really easy removal spells. Serrated Arrows and Dry Spell and Anaba Shaman, stuff like that. So he's solid. He's rock solid. I think on Hava Constable's a 3. I think he always makes the deck. He doesn't really give you a win condition per se, but he locks up the ground for you. Good card. All right, on Hava In, 1 green. It's a sorcery. You gain X plus 1 life, where X is the number of green creatures on the battlefield. So most cards that are just life gain usually don't do enough. If it doesn't have any battlefield presence, doesn't remove something, doesn't draw you a card, all it does is gain you life. A long time ago, someone mathed out what they thought a life gain effect would need to be worth a card. I mean, you can argue it back and forth as to whether or not it would truly be worth this or not. I think the conclusion they arrived at was 15 life. That was about what a card was worth. Obviously, if there was a card for a low mana cost that gained 15 life, it would utterly change the face of the format because of decks like, red aggro and soldiers and stuff. But I digress. On Hava In, it's going to be difficult in the early stages of the game to gain much more than about 4 life with this card. In the very late stages of the game, maybe you'll gain upwards of 10 life with this card, but either way, it's hard to win with damage in Homelands. It's very difficult. Black can do it with an aggressive early start. Red might be able to do it with Aeron the Relentless, or maybe putting Feast of the Unicorn on one of their first strikers. And then late into the game, there can be some like giant bombs that come down, Veldrain of Singur and Baron Singur, Ebony Rhinos. The board can get really big and it can get evasive. But I don't think this card does what you need it to do a lot of the time. I don't think it gains enough life. I don't think it's necessarily worth a card in your deck. Worth a slot. So I'm going to give this a 0.5 for some kind of a weird sideboard edge case. But yeah, I'm just giving it a 0.5. You shouldn't run it, generally speaking. Autumn Willow. So she's a rare. She is a 4/4 avatar for 6 mana. She has Shroud. That means that no player can target the creature with spells or abilities unless you use her activated ability. Pay a green until end of turn. She can be the target of spells and abilities controlled by a target player as though she didn't have Shroud. And that's neat. This means that you could safely put a, Feast of the Unicorn on Autumn Willow, which, in terms of lore is something that she would be utterly despise, but we're just talking about gameplay here. So, you could safely enchant her, make her like an 8/4. And then later in the game, maybe you could, use her ability again, target her with Joven's Tools, make her unblockable except by walls. And that's neat. That's interesting. Just, a 4/4 untargetable creature is pretty amazing in this format. One of the larger creatures you can be playing, one of the better things you can be doing. I believe she dodges literally all removal unless the opponent got you to a low number of creatures and then you sacrificed her to a Funeral March. I think that's the only way that the opponent, or Apocalypse Chime. Yeah, those are, I think, the only cards in the format that would kill Autumn Willow. So she will stick around. She will do good work for you. Being, 4/4 and untargetable, she's going to hold the ground very effectively. And as I said, there are ways that you could turn her into an offensive threat as well. So I think she's top notch, really good. I'm going to give her a 4. She's right between a 4 and a 4.5. I don't think she's quite evasive enough, like doesn't have a good way to punch through just on her own. You need to combo her with something to really get through that final bit to win the game. But being untargetable means that the opponent can't hit her with giant oysters, right? She does things in this format that other cards just can't do. Yeah, I think I'm going to give her a 4. She's really great. All right, Carapace. So commons, 1 green. It's an aura for a creature. The creature gets +0/+2. You can sacrifice Carapace to regenerate the enchanted creature. Now, this isn't the best card on its own merits, right? It doesn't help you offensively except, to keep the creature alive and regenerate it when you attack in. But it can keep something alive that should have died, right? Even with -1 counters from Serrated Arrows, Carapace could keep it alive. Carapace is also something you could put on Autumn Willow along with Feast of the Unicorn. You can make her very large, able to punch in for combat damage, and if you've got Carapace on her, even if their blocking assignments would have killed her, you can sacrifice and regenerate her. So I think that would be a neat kind of Voltron build, right? Where you get down Autumn Willow, you grab up like Feast of the Unicorn and Carapace, and you just make her into this threat that the opponent cannot deal with. That could win you the game. Right? They have no real way of stopping that most of the time. So I think that would be pretty good. Carapace can also take some other creatures that normally couldn't quite attack in, would get into some nasty trades in Homelands, and you can make them tougher and more durable and regenerate. Carapace goes pretty well in Hungry Mist that we're going to look at later. I don't think Hungry Mist is like the best, but if you want to make an aggressive start in green, one of the ways you can do that is to play a Hungry Mist and then enchant it up with Carapace. You kind of build your own Crawworm that comes down 2 turns early, and it can regenerate. that's not the worst. Anyway, I think Carapace is about a 2.5. I think there are enough use cases where you want to grow a creature out of range of removal in this format that Carapace could be quite useful. Right, if you want to use Ace and Bureaucrats, and you like their tap ability, and you know they're just going to die, you could enchant it with Carapace and possibly keep it alive. Even in the face of serrated arrows. So, pretty good card, 2.5. All right, Daughter of Autumn. This is a rare. She is a legendary 2/4 avatar, 2 and 2 green, and you can pay a white, and the next 1 damage that we dealt to a white creature this turn is dealt to Daughter of Autumn instead. So she's got some of the damage redirection effect that like Hasdur the Abbot has. She comes down a turn sooner, has a point less toughness, and she does 1-for-1 white mana, whereas he does X and tap. But anyway, Daughter of Autumn is not the worst. A 2/4 for 4 is a pretty good body in this format. Good blocker. It's going to help lock up the ground for you. There are so many 3/3s for 5. A 2/4 makes a nice blocking presence. And in a green-white deck in particular, she's going to make your white creatures even more impossible to kill than they already are. So, in a straight green deck, I think Daughter of Autumn's about a 2.5, 2.5 or a 3. In a green-white deck, specifically, I think that she's a 3. Maybe not quite a 3.5, but eminently playable in this format. Fairy Noble, this is a rare. This one's neat. It's a build around rare. So, Fairy Noble, it's a 1/2 flyer for 3 mana in green. Other fairy creatures you control get an extra point of toughness, and you can tap him to give other fairy creatures +1 power until end of turn. So, Fairy Noble can bolster up the blue creature Sea Sprite. It already came with protection from red. Now if you give it another point of toughness, it starts dodging some of the removal that was going to trip you up. This would be a little bit wild, but if you branched into 3 colors and you had Sarah Aviary, then you could also give your flying creatures another +1/+1 if you had white in the deck for the Sarah Aviary. There are no fairies in white, but it's just something to throw out there. Or you could make sure you keep Fairy Noble alive in green-blue, right, which has Sea Sprite, so there's a fairy there. You could get Coral Reef, and you could bolster the toughness of Fairy Noble and put him further out of range of serrated arrows. Right, because if the opponent realizes you're running fairies, they might use both counters on serrated arrows to try to kill the Fairy Noble. But Coral Reef could keep pumping up his toughness. Or Carapace, for example, could pump up his toughness. And this means you've got this Fairy Tribal Lord, which is going to pump up your fairies. So do you have other fairies in green? Yes, you do. So let's scroll down here a minute. So in green, the common Willow Fairy is a 1/2 flyer for 2 mana. That's already a very playable card. He adds a point of toughness, and then he can tap out a point of power. So, Willow Fairy is a great flying blocker in this format, and then he can turn it into just a fantastic card. And then you've also got Willow Priestess at rare, which is a fairy druid. This one doesn't fly, but it would still get the power toughness pumping from Fairy Noble. Willow Priestess can tap to put a fairy permanent card from your hand on the battlefield. She can also pay 3 to give a green creature protection from black. So Willow Priestess is a great card because of the just distributing protection from black. She's also great in the fairy deck. So there is a potential fairy deck that you can put together. So, Fairy Noble, Willow Fairy, Willow Priestess, Sea Sprite. There's enough there, and this is a very small card pool, right? So if you see these cards, you can probably cobble this deck together because of how small the card pool is. And that's pretty good. And Fairy Noble is not bad on its own. Just on its own, it's kind of like a 3-mana Willow Fairy, and that blocks very well for you against other flyers. So for all of those reasons, I think Fairy Noble's already a 3, even if you're not in the Fairies deck. And in the Fairies deck in particular, then, bumps up to like a 3.5 or a 4 at that point. Good card. Just generally good card. 1/2 flyers are solid blockers in this format. Alright, Folk of Anhava, this is a common. It's 1/1. Whenever it blocks, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So Folk of Anhava is, it's decent on defense. The trouble, of course, is that it has 1 toughness. So it gets swept up by a dry spell, dies to a Naba Shaman, dies to Serrated Arrows, dies to Grandmother Singyr. 1 toughness creatures are a trap in this format. They don't have enough board impact, and you end up getting card disadvantage from them because of like Serrated Arrows and a Naba Shaman. It's a good solid blocker. I think this is a 1. Right, you would be sad to run this card. You'd be happy to cut it from your final deck list. I think this card's a 1. All right, Hungry Mist. So this is a common. It's a 6/2 elemental for 2 and 2 green. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Hungry Mist unless you pay 2 green. So this is one of the highest power creatures in the entire format. I believe that Marjan in blue is the only creature that's got more power in Homelands. So it's a 6/2 for 4. Obviously, that could block and trade with just about anything. It has enough power to be able to attack in and force trades from the opponent. Paying 2 mana every upkeep is obviously terrible, but it's really hard to find ways to go on the offense in Homelands. It's hard to find ways to punch through for combat damage. Decks just kind of immediately start setting up, 0/5 defenders and 4/5 defenders and 1/3s that can tap to gain +3 power and, +3 toughness. It becomes quickly pretty impossible to mount an offense in Homelands. Hungry Mist has enough power to do it. And as I said, if you put Carapace onto Hungry Mist, then at 4 toughness it doesn't die so easily, and you can, sack the Carapace to regenerate it. So if you're able to punch in and start taking out some of those defenders, then, Hungry Mist is doing some good work for you. Now, so if you're in mono green, you get down Hungry Mist, you put 2 copies of Carapace on this, the opponent might be in a bad position at that point. They might have to kind of chump block some things away. You're going to keep regenerating the Hungry Mist. It's enough damage that it's really hard to stop. If you give white enough setup time, white can prevent that much damage with like Samite Alchemist and Abbey Matron and stuff. But this comes down pretty early. This comes down on turn 4 and can throw down the Carapaces and attack on turn 5. I really don't think this is the worst. Also, there's another angle if you don't want to Voltron this card, where you don't want to pay the upkeep all the time if you don't have to. If you just attack in with it, right, it's a 6/2, let it die in combat and trade away, and then the next turn you play another Hungry Mist. Maybe you have a deck full of Hungry Mists. Then you have these 6-power creatures in this format that normally doesn't have something that powerful that can punch through the defenders on the other side. So I think that's kind of neat. It's awkward with the upkeep mana, but I think there are play patterns with Hungry Mist where you can actually somewhat break the board stalemate at least a little bit. Make combat actually happen. The problem that Hungry Mist does not solve is Giant Oyster. Giant Oyster is incredibly bad to be across the table from if you're playing the Hungry Mist deck. Because you need to build up, a board. You need to build up as much as you can, but you've got this mana sink every turn of the Hungry Mist. So if you're in a long board stalemate with blue, you want to play all the other creatures out of your hand first before you start getting the Hungry Mists on the table. Green can tap down Giant Oyster with Roots. If you have a lot of copies of Roots, then that's a way that green can punch past Giant Oyster. Anyway. So this is going to sound strange. I think Hungry Mist is between a 2.5 and a 3. I'm inclined to give it a 3. I know that it looks terrible by modern standards, but its stat line and the color that it's in and the cards that surround it put it in a position where it gives you this offensive ability that otherwise does not exist. Hungry Mist also doesn't pair up very well against red. Red has a lot of first strike. You need those carapaces on it to get the toughness up to the point it can actually punch in. And even then you have to watch out for Alaban's Tower. Anyway, overall, I think this is much more playable than it looks because of the format. If you want to win with damage, this is a tool that could help you to do it. Joven's Ferrets. So this is a 1/1 for 1 green. When it attacks, it gets +0/+2 until end of turn. At end of combat, you tap all creatures that blocked it, and they don't untap on their controller's next untap step. Joven's Ferrets is pretty cool. I think it's like just shy of having some constructed applications. Unfortunately, there are -1 counters that come around from things like serrated arrows. And an Abashaman can ping this when it hasn't attacked, when it doesn't have that +2 toughness. And in general, even as a 1/3 attacker, the opponent can probably set up some beneficial blocks, and they probably don't care that much if their stuff gets tapped down, as long as they kill your ferret. Unfortunately, I think Joven's Ferrets is a trap in this format. As this format goes, it's a pretty good 1/1 for 1, but that still isn't saying much. I have to give it a 1.5 here. It dies too easily. The format just really is hateful to 1 toughness creatures. So I cannot give it more than a 1.5 in good conscience. Alright, Leaping Lizard. So this is common. It's 1 green. It's a 2/3 lizard. You can pay a green and a colorless. It gains -0, -1, and flying until end of turn. So if you activate this, it's a 2/2 flyer. If you don't activate it, it's a 2/3. Leaping Lizard is secretly one of the better common creatures of the format. It's not up there with, Giant Oyster by any means. But Leaping Lizard outsizes the other common flying creatures. You have to get up to uncommon before you start seeing, like, Abbey Gargoyle that can outsize the Leaping Lizard. So, yeah, Leaping Lizard trades favorably in combat with just about all the little flying creatures of this format. It can even stop an aggressive start from black, where they get Singular Bats, then they enchant it up with Feast of the Unicorn. Leaping Lizard can jump into the air as a 2/2 and trade with that Singular Bats. That's a 5/2, and keep you from losing the game. And if your opponent doesn't have giant oysters, Leaping Lizard can jump into the air, and it's one of the better flying creatures. If you put Carapace on it, and then it's a 2/4 flyer, your opponent's gonna have a lot of trouble even like double blocking it to stop it. You can attack through most of the flyers in the format at that point. And on the ground as a 2/3 for 3, it's kind of above rate for what you expect in Homelands. At 3 mana, you kind of see 2/2s in Homelands. As a 2/3, it's a really good creature on the ground too. It's a good solid blocker in the early game, and it's a good flyer. I think Leaping Lizard is a 3.5. It doesn't beat out some of the crazy rares and other things that this format has. It doesn't beat out Giant Oyster, but it's just better than most of the common flyers. So yeah, Leaping Lizard, 3.5. Fantastic card. One of the reasons to be considering green. Mammoth Harness, this is a rare. So this is an aura. The enchanted creature loses flying. So you could bring, Abbey Gargoyle or Baron Singular or something down to earth. Stop the opponent from being able to fly in for the win. And then, on top of that, whenever the enchanted creature blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, the other creature gains first strike until end of turn. So, whenever this tangles with things in combat, everything it tangles with gains first strike, and that is pretty crippling. I think Roots is still the better removal spell, and Roots is uncommon, whereas this is a rare. But Mammoth Harness is pretty debilitating. It can take a couple of crucial flyers out of the sky, and then, making everything that the creature would get into battle with gain first strike makes it pretty unable to attack into your board state. Right, because you can block with everything and everything would have first strike against it. It's also worse as a defender because then anything that you attack with and that it blocks gains first strike. Mammoth Harness is not the best, but it's okay. It's okay. It can deal with flyers. Not that green needs a lot of help with flyers because of Leaping Lizard, and how good Leaping Lizard is, but Mammoth Harness is alright. It's just fine. I think Mammoth Harness is about a 2.5. Yeah, it can solve some situations for you. Can, really take the wind out of the opponent's sails with their best attacker. Or best defender. Yeah, I don't think it always makes the cut into the deck, but I think most of the time it probably does. And this is another weird rare aura that debuffs a creature that could work in a Baki's Curse deck. Again, that's not likely to happen. You're not likely to have, 5 Ironclaw Curses and 4 Mammoth Harnesses because they're rares for Baki's Curse, but it is possible. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to give it about a 2.5. Primal Order. It's a rare enchantment, 2 and 2 green. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals damage to that player equals the number of non-basic lands they control. The constructed applications on this, at least as a sideboard card, maybe even main deck, are quite strong, but in limited, there's only the uncommon cycle of tri-lands in Homelands. There's not going to be that many non-basics. So I think Primal Order, I'm going to call it a 0.5. Right, if you were in a best of 3 match and you had an opponent who was running like a 5-color deck and they had a lot of those tri-lands in it, you could bring in Primal Order to punish them. But most of the time I think it's pretty much unplayable. So sideboard only. Very niche. Renewal. It's a common. It's got some cool art by Kaja Foglio. It's green and 2 colorless. It's a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you sacrifice a land. You search for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, untapped, notably, and then you shuffle. And you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So, there is no mana fixing to speak of in this format except for the uncommon tri-lands, Renewal, and Jinx in blue. And Jinx in blue would be a really hard way to do it. So really, Renewal is the best way. It is the best way to smooth out your colors in this entire format. And this means one of the draws to being green is not necessarily that green is the strongest color, but that green can play nicely by fetching up basic lands of the other colors you need. So I think it would be really hard to make a 3-color deck in Homelands unless green is one of the 3 colors. And then if you have enough copies of Renewal, I think you could make a 3-color deck work. I don't know if it would ever be possible to run 4 or 5. You probably need Renewal and the tri-lands to do that. But yeah, Renewal, it's good for a 2-color deck. It's good for a 3-color deck. You know, it lets you trade out one land for another, thins the land out of your deck a little bit, replaces itself with a new card. Just overall, I think Renewal is a really strong play. It's really good. So if you're in a multicolor deck, then Renewal in that deck is probably like a 3.5. It's probably like necessary, or at least a 3.0. In normal green, you don't really need to run this card. I guess you could. You could, effectively cycle this for a new card to thin your deck of a land, right? Sack a forest, find a forest, draw a card. Just kind of a, it'd be a really niche value play in a mono green deck. It's something you could do as a filler sort of card or whatever. But in the decks that want it, I'm going to give this card a 3 overall because I think most draft formats lean heavily towards being at least 2 colors when you build a deck. So I'm going to give Renewal a 3. It always makes the cut in a multicolor deck. Up next, we got Root Spider. It's an uncommon. So this is a green and 3. It's a 2/2 spider. Don't be fooled, it does not have reach. It does not block flyers, it does not have reach. But it's a 2/2 for 4. Whenever it blocks, it gets +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn. So a 3-power first striker on defense is incredibly good in this format. There are tons of like 3/3s for 5 that would like the ability to get in. Root Spider just shuts that right down. Leads to a board stalemate. 2 toughness is, it's not the best or the worst. It doesn't immediately die to a serrated arrows. Your opponent has to work just a little bit in order to kill it. It's a very good blocker. Very, very good blocker. So Root Spider's probably about a, I'm going to give it a 2.5. I think it almost always makes the cut into the deck. If you've got a different strategy that you're employing, if you're like Hungry Mist the deck and you don't have any room for something that doesn't attack well, I could see times where you might cut the Root Spider, but I'm going to give it a 2.5. Fantastic blocker. All right, Roots. So this is an uncommon enchantment aura, green and 3. It enchants a creature without flying. When it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature, and it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So keeping things tapped down is kind of moved into blue, but here we've got it in green. It doesn't hit flying creatures. There's only a couple of really dangerous flying creatures in the format, like Abbey Gargoyles and Baron Singir are the really dangerous ones, and Leaping Lizard pairs up nicely with pretty much all the other flyers that exist in the format. So there's only a couple of things that Roots doesn't hit that you would want it to. And one of the best things to stick a Roots on is a Giant Oyster. Tap that sucker down, get it out of there. Every one fewer Giant Oyster across the table from you, you're getting that much closer to being able to attack in on the opponent. Right, normally Giant Oysters are like the thing that locks out the game in blue, and Roots is a fantastic way to get rid of that thing and find a way to punch through. Right, you can trade away your Hungry Mists for their, their 2/2s for 3 and their 4/5 Dark Mazes and your whatevers. Giant Oyster's the one that gives you real problems that you can't get past, and Roots can help you do it. There's just all kinds of great targets for Roots. It's, lockdown is on Shade. You can lock down Veldrain of Singir with Roots, right? He can gain Forest Walk normally. But you can keep him tapped down using Roots. And that's great. I think Roots is just premium removal. Some of the best in this format. Give it a 3.5. It really does what you need it to do. All right, we got a rare. This is Rysorian Badger. It's 2 and a green. It's a creature, Badger. It's a 2/2. And when you cast this spell, you get this Heather Hudson art of this adorable little badger playing a skull like it's a drum, using bones as the drumsticks. It's so freaking adorable. Yeah, anyway. When Rysorian Badger attacks and isn't blocked, you may exile up to 2 target creature cards from the defending player's graveyard. If you do, you gain 1 life for each card you exile this way, and Rysorian Badger assigns no combat damage this turn. So, it's difficult to get the Rysorian Badger in a position where it can attack in unblocked. But if you manage to do that, maybe Joven's Tools or something, the reason you might want to eat creatures out of the graveyard other than gaining life is to give them less fodder later in the game when they find a Drudge spell. Drudge spell is a black enchantment where they can exile creature cards out of their graveyard and turn them into regenerating skeletons. If you can actually get Rysorian Badger through unblocked and deny them that, in the late game when they find their Drudge spell, I think that would be worth it in that case against a black deck. And the rest of the time, I think I'd rather take the damage than the life. Unless you're in some kind of a weird damage race with the opponent. A really weird damage race. 2/2 for 3 is kind of forgettable, and its ability is kind of niche. It's not unplayable. It's fine. It's better than, a 1/1 or 1 toughness creature, 100%, more than 100%. I think I give it a 2. It's kind of a filler card. I love the art. I give it a 2. It's playable, but it's cuttable. All right, Shrink. So this is a common. It's 1 green. It's an instant. Target creature gets -5, -0 until end of turn. And this is one of the only combat tricks that isn't like something that's already on the board, like, a Coral Reef or something that the opponent sees coming. Shrink is one of the only combat tricks that can work on offense and defense. Now, clearly, debuffing a creature's power is a more defensive play than offensive play, but for example, you could attack in with a Hungry Mist, the opponent blocks with some First Striker, and you shrink it, and it dies to the Hungry Mist, and the Hungry Mist is still around. There are times and ways to use this. Shrink could also blow out a red block where they're using Alaban's Tower, right, to give a blocker +3/+1. They're relying on the First Strike to get the job done. -5 power is a heck of a debuff. You could blow out their combat trick that way. So it's one of the only combat tricks in the whole format. For that reason, I think it has some value. I think it would be better if you could make your creature bigger rather than their creature smaller, but it's what we got to work with. I think the first copy of Shrink in your deck is about a 2, right? So, it's playable. But you don't want multiple copies of it. You don't want, like, a lot of Shrink in your deck. You just want, like, 1 or 2 at most to kind of give you a little edge when the combat finally happens, when the stalemate breaks and someone moves. Then it's really nice to have 1 or 2 Shrinks to make the math change in your favor. I'm going to give it a 2. Yeah, it's kind of between a 1.5 and a 2. I think it's just valuable enough to be a 2. But you don't want too many of it. And in a small format like this, you'll probably see it going around late. Okay, Spectral Bears. This is an uncommon. It's a green and a colorless. It's a 3/3 bear spirit. Whenever it attacks, if the defending player controls no black non-token permanents, right? So black cards that are permanents. It doesn't untap on your next untap step. Spectral Bears is pretty phenomenal. It would be better if, it had a special ability to punch through, if it had an evasion ability. But most of the 3/3s in this format are 5 mana. This one is 2. This one is 2 mana. That's worth something. That is worth noting. Black is one of the better colors, so it's not at all unlikely that you could have black across the table from you. If you're in a position to attack with it, it's kind of okay that it doesn't untap for 1 turn. That's not the worst thing. It exposes it a little bit more to Giant Oyster, but overall, I think Spectral Bears, it's easily a 3.5. It's one of the better uncommons. The size for its mana value is kind of unreal. If there was a way to get an early start in this format where you overwhelm the opponent, it would be if you could pick up like 10 Spectral Bears in your deck. Flood the board with 3/3s before the opponent can set up all their defensive measures. Back them up with a Shrink or 2. That would be the way to do it. That's how you would actually kill an opponent, I think. Just by, an aggro start would be Spectral Bears. There's not a lot of other support, not a lot of early creatures to do it with. You could experiment, though. You could try throwing in like Joven's Ferrets and Volk van Hava and see if you can make a Spectral Bears deck where you just slam all these early creatures and see if it's good enough. So, and even if you, top deck this late in the game, most of your 5 mana plays in this format are 3/3s, so a 2 mana play that's a 3/3 is still just fine. Even late in the game. So yeah, I'm giving Spectral Bears a 3.5. Might maybe be a way to unlock an aggro archetype in Homelands that just otherwise doesn't exist. Willow Fairy. So this is a common. It's a green and a colorless. It's a 1/2 flyer. And it's a fairy. So Fairy Noble We'll pump up the toughness on this. If you tap it, it'll pump up the power. Could work well in a white deck as well with Sarah Aviary. 1/2 blocks very nicely against the other little flyers of this format. This is just a good bread and butter card to have in your green deck. So I think this card is right around a 3, just because it blocks the other little flyers of the format so nicely. 2.5 or a 3. In the fairy deck, you obviously want to pick every copy you can. Go with your fairy nobles. It's good. All right, and finally we've got Willow Priestess. Willow Priestess is a rare. She's a 2/2 fairy druid for 4. You can tap to put a fairy permanent card from your hand on the battlefield. That's interesting, but these games go really long. So I feel like that part of this card's not as important. You kind of have time to get to all of your mana and time to get to all of your plays over the course of a long game. The much more important aspect of this card is pay a green and 2. Without tapping it, target green creature gains protection from black until end of turn. That is amazing. Obviously, it doesn't matter in every matchup, but black and blue are the strongest colors of this archetype. They're the strongest colors in this format. And Willow Priestess is giving you an out against black. So black can't rely on their dry spell to kill your things. Black can't rely on Grandmother Singir to change the combat math. They can't necessarily, once this card is down and you have mana open, they can't necessarily stick a torture on something or a funeral march on something. You can block their stuff all day, and they can't block you with their black creatures. So they better be 2 colors. If you've got Willow Priestess in your deck and you're up against an opponent that's, 2 colors with black, heavy into black, you can afford to just kind of play a long game, wait until you hit this as your bomb rear, and just grind them out. Just have enough mana open and grind them out. So if they don't have Giant Oyster, then I guess it's nice that you could put fairy permanents from your hand on the battlefield with your tap ability, because then you don't have to, commit mana to cast your fairies, and you can leave the mana open to give protection from black. Okay. So Willow Priestess really only matters in the black matchup, but the black matchup I think is going to happen more frequently because black's one of the better colors. Gosh, I think Willow Priestess is... I think it might be criminal to give her less than a 4. She won't be as good as a 4 when you're not against black. But when you're against black, she's going to be a 4.5. So, I'm just going to average that down to a 4. I think she always makes the cut because there's always a chance you're going to be up against black. And yeah, a 2/2 for 4s is okay, actually. It's not great, but it's okay. And she might still, have some upside. Maybe they have a black splash in their deck, like, they splash black to get a little bit of removal, like, Broken Visage or something. So if you see a swamp over there, you can start holding the mana open. Might get some value out of the tap ability. Yeah, I'm going to give her a 4 and say that even though she's, niche, it's a common enough application that she blows the game out and is a bomb in that situation. That brings us to the end of green. So, somewhere, if I was ranking the colors in Homelands, I'd probably start with blue is the strongest, black is the second strongest, I've got a real toss-up between white and green as far as who's in third. Because Abbey Gargoyle is an uncommon and it's very strong. But some of green's commons, like Leaping Lizard, are really good. So it's a little bit of a toss-up for me as far as whether green or white is the third best color. In Homelands, they're both pretty solid. And then red is kind of distant. It's in fifth place. Red's not useless. It can do tricks with First Strike and Feast of the Unicorn. It's got Aeron the Relentless who can punch through. Might be able to, play a land destruction route and just keep you off of all of your game-ending plays and kind of burn you to the face over time. But yeah, that's about how I'd rank the colors in Homelands. Join me next time. I'm going to go over lands and colorless. And until then, stay cool.